There's many different events of a discriminatory nature that have created an environment of prejudice, shame, trauma, loss of culture, and mistrust of Indigenous people towards non-Indigenous people in British Columbia. Some of these are listed below, such as the European colonizers displacing Indigenous people from their land, the Indian Act of 1876, which assimilated Indigenous people into non-Indigenous culture by stripping them of their cultural rights, practices, land, and way of life, residential schools, which caused discriminatory, unsafe, and abusive conditions to young children of Indigenous ethnicity, and the 60s scoop. In the article by the Health Council of Canada, cultural safety's definition is found on page 5. It is, and I quote, a system free of racism and stereotypes where Aboriginal people are treated with empathy, dignity, and respect. Cultural safety must ensure that there is a reciprocal trust between the parties based on listening, communication, and respect, and decision-making should primarily be based on client preferences, as in, it is family-centered. There are 4 basic principles of which cultural safety lies on. The Health Council of Canada calls these the 4 R's. These are relationship, so the trust between the two parties, respect, which includes the recognition of the different cultures in each party, reciprocity, which involves the listening and communication and understanding of power balance between the two parties, and the last being reflection, which involves reflection of both roles, including the so-called client and the professional. The First Peoples Principles of Learning were introduced into British Columbia's curriculum in the 2006-2007 year and was developed by Indigenous peoples to implement culturally safe and meaningful practice into education for Indigenous and non-Indigenous students. While many of these practices have shown some progress in the right direction for Indigenous peoples, many teachers were not formally trained on how to properly implement these principles in their practice, and there's still a lot of confusion, lack of trying, and surface-level applications of these principles. A couple ways in which you can make your class culturally safe is by using these First People principles meaningfully and not just fitting them into the curriculum. Connecting with Indigenous elders and resources, communicating with Indigenous students and families in respectful and culturally appropriate ways, which may involve asking questions and educating oneself, having humility and apologizing when you make a culturally offensive mistake or accident, standing up for Indigenous rights and being an advocate for families, connecting Indigenous and non-Indigenous students and families with Indigenous resources and experiences, and ensuring you are using family-centered practices when a decision is being made. Ways in which you can ensure that your school is culturally safe is in making sure there are professional development days based on Indigenous ways and culturally safe practices, promoting culturally safe practices in school-wide events like assemblies, having Indigenous teachers and staff integrated into the school community everywhere, advocating for the Indigenous families when you see injustices or silences, and inviting more Indigenous speakers into the educational environment.